Greetings, my name is Kerry and welcome back to my channel. This feels very weird for me because I usually do most of my filming at the weekends, on Saturdays or on Sundays. This is actually a Tuesday evening. I'm heading into quite a lot of essay deadlines and other paperwork and stuff for my course, and I just wasn't sure I'd have time to film over the next couple of weekends, so I wanted to get quite a lot of videos in the bag tonight so that I have some content for you over the coming weeks when I'm working frantically on my assignments. This is the first of a number of videos I'm filming tonight, and you're going to grow very used to my current favourite jumper, T-Rex Existential Crisis. I love it, and he's got a cup of tea. I got this from the Dino Comic store. It's not sponsored, but I will try and leave a link if you would like to go and check out their store. I love Dino Comics. Anywho, all of that to say, this video is going to be my February stats wrap up. Yeah, without further ado, I'm just gonna get on with it. I read a total of 10 books in February. That was from 9 different authors. The total number of pages for the books that I finished in February came to 3,089 pages, which is slightly down from January, and that gave me an average book length of 309 pages, which isn't too bad. The longest book that I read was The Empire of Gold by S.A. Chakraborty. I finally read it. I finally finished this series and it was epic, and I enjoyed every single one of the 766 pages of this book. The shortest book that I read was called Killian's Dead by Josie Jaffrey, and this is 22 pages. It's a short story prequel to a series where I read the first book in that series as well, which it was called Mayday. So this is a short story that is a prequel to this book, if that makes sense. 9 of the books were under 500 pages, and then the one book, Empire of Gold, was over 500 pages but under 1,000 pages, so I earned £2 for that book and £1 for every other book, which gave me a total earnings for February of £11. I needed to read more though because I spent way more than that on books in February, so I'm just gonna quickly go through all the stuff I bought. It wasn't loads. Just one of the books was a new release and was a little bit pricey. So the first book that I bought is this one. This is called Gloria's Weakness by Alia. I picked this up because she was an author in a book that I read in January. She contributed to a book called A Rhythm of Prayer, and just something about what she wrote in that book really hit me, and then I discovered that she had a book that was out recently, not entirely sure when it came out actually, or 2019. The subtitle of it is Discovering God in All We Lack, and that just really appealed to me and where I'm at emotionally recently and mentally. So when I heard about this book I thought I probably should pick that up, so that was £7.51. I then bought 3 books by the same author. I just had an urge to read this series, and I hadn't actually realised that all 3 books were from the same series, but I picked up the third one because of its title and then realised that it was from the same series. So anyway, so this is the 101 Dalmatians series by Dodie Smith. So we've got the 101 Dalmatians, the Starlight Barking, and the Midnight Kittens, and I picked that one up just because it's about kittens, and then found out it's the 3rd book in the series, which was quite exciting. So I got these because a while back I was listening to my friend Justine's podcast that she has with her sister, You're Never Gonna Read That, and they were talking about another Dodie Smith book, I Captured the Castle, but they mentioned the series because everyone's heard of 101 Dalmatians, but not many people realise that it's the first one in the series, and the second book apparently gets quite weird. And then it came up as a question on Richard Osman's House of Games, and so I texted Justine and I was like, oh, didn't you talk about this on your podcast? And my other friend Judith apparently has done a review of the Starlight Barking because it's so ridiculous, and so they were like, oh, you have to read it, you have to read it. So I ended up buying all 3 because I hadn't read the first one ever. So 101 Dalmatians cost me £2.35, Starlight Barking cost £5.19, and the Midnight Kittens cost £2.38. Starlight Barking was really difficult to get a hold of actually, but the others were slightly more reasonable, so I got all them secondhand. And then the book that I'm most excited about and was most pricey is the gorgeous The Galaxy and the Ground Within by Becky Chambers. I haven't read this yet. I'm maybe slightly putting off reading it because I don't want this series to be over, but I've been waiting for this book, and it is like the most anticipated book of my life probably. So this just came out in February and I had it on pre-order, so this cost £13.08. With the money that I earned in February as well, I finished off the month in the minus, but not too bad actually, because I hadn't spent a lot the previous months. So my total in my book budget at the end of February is £2.72, which isn't too bad actually, to be fair. Considering the amount I've been reading, I'm quite happy with that. The issue was, you'll know if you watch my channel regularly, certain books don't count in my account. So anything I need to buy for uni, or if I'm buying books for book club, they don't count. So I did buy quite a few books for uni. I don't have them here, they're all in my study. At the beginning of February I had 594 books on my TBR. At the end of February, this had gone up to 609. I've crossed the 600 book line, which I was hoping never to do, but I have done. And I have some regrets, mainly just that it's gone over that number. I mean, all the books I bought are really relevant to my assignments. They were mainly ones that it was going to be difficult to get out of the college library because it's restricted access at the moment. I have been able to get a few books out that I've needed through that, but they were either books that I couldn't get from the college library or ones that if I could get them, I thought they would probably be books that would be useful to me to have in the future anyway, so I decided just to buy them. So that was why that number went up by so much. I'm really hoping to work on getting that down a little bit now we're in March, but we will see, because with essays and some of those books I'm only reading bits of for the essays, so I won't be sitting down and reading them all the way through, but we will see how we get on with that. The book that was written earliest of the ones that I read was Les Bons by Genet, which was written in 1947. This is the play. And the book that was written most recently was an e-arc that is actually comes out at some point in March, may or may not be out by the time you see this because I can't remember the exact date it comes out, but that is called Unspoken by Guvna B, and that was a memoir, and it comes out at some point in March 2021. I gave 3 books 5 stars and 7 books 4 stars, so actually a really solid reading month. A couple of those 4 stars were closer to 3.5 stars, but for the purposes of my spreadsheet I like to round up because I don't like giving half stars on my spreadsheet, but I have started using half stars on Storygraph, which was very exciting. This month was the first time I used the half star feature on Storygraph. So the book that took me the longest to read was called Forgotten Women, The Leaders by Tsjeng. This book took me 28 days to read. This was another e-arc I had from NetGalley, and then the book that I read the quickest was Killian's Dead because it was really super short. So my average reading length was 12 days, which is pretty good. The book that had been on my TBR the longest was Paddington Abroad by Michael Bond. This book I read when I was home for my nan's funeral, so I don't have a copy with me. There's maybe another book as well that I might talk about later that's the same situation. That had been on my TBR for 1,263 days. The book that had been on my TBR the shortest time was one that I got out as an ebook from the library, so I started reading it straight away, and that was called Margot and Me by Juno Dawson. So that gave me an average length on my TBR of 360 days, which is still less than a year, which is exciting. I like it when that number is less than a year, but it just does show the broad range of how long stuff has been on my TBR, and keeping that number low is a mixture of reading really old stuff and really new stuff. I didn't publish a TBR for February, so none of the books were on a published monthly TBR, which is fine. This next stat I'm actually really pleased with. You may remember if you watched my goals video that my goal is to read the majority, well, about at least half the books from my owned TBR. This month 6 of the books I finished were from my owned TBR, which is very exciting. 1 book was a library book, 2 books were NetGalley arts, and 1 book was a reread. I read 3 ebooks, 2 hardback books, and the rest were paperbacks. And then for genres I read 2 urban fantasy, 1 play, 1 non-fiction, 1 contemporary, 1 science fiction, 1 fantasy, 1 memoir, 1 mystery, and 1 classic, or what I would class as a classic anyway. 1 book was for children's audience, 3 books were young adult, and the rest were adult. Read from a range of publishers, so 6 of the books were from big 5 publishers and 4 of the books were from independent publishers, which isn't too bad. For the author nationalities, there were 2 Americans, 5 British, 1 British Ghanaian, 1 French, and 1 Singaporean. And then for the author ethnicity, there was 1 British West African, 1 East Asian, 2 White American, 5 White British, and 1 White West European. So yeah, only 2 of the authors this month were authors of colour, which is not good enough really at all. Definitely not. So we'll be trying to work on that moving forward. And then for the author genders, 4 of the books were by cisgendered men, 5 were by cisgendered women, and 1 was a transgender woman. Okay, for my challenges, I did pretty well on these, quite happy with these. 1 book was in a foreign language, which was Les Bons by Genet. 4 books were review copies, which is pretty good. None of the books were from my oldest on my TBR list. 1 book counted towards Read Around the World, which was for Singapore, and that was Forgotten Women, The Leaders. The author Zing is Singaporean. And then 1 book completed a series, which was Empire of Gold. For my author diversity, again, I'm fairly happy with this collection of stats. Well, apart from this first one, 2 of the books were from authors of colour. That number needs to be higher. But 5 of the books were from authors from the LGBTQIA+ community, which is pretty good. And then 1 book was from an author with a disability, and 1 book was an author with a mental illness, or referred to mental illness. And then 1 was other diversity, which I think was Empire of Gold, because S.A. Chakraborty, Shannon Chakraborty, is Muslim, and that's a different religion to me, so I think that's why I counted that as an other diversity. And then for character diversity, again, I hit all of these markers this month, so marginalised ethnicity, LGBTQIA+, disability, mental health and neurodiversity rep were all covered in at least 1 of the books, and some in more than 1. That's the stats. This is the difficult part of every one of these videos, my least favourite and my most favourite books. So while I gave all of the books 4 stars or 5 stars on the spreadsheet, the 1 book that I would have given 3.5 stars, it was a slightly generous 4 stars, was The Thursday Murder Club by Richard Osman. I had high expectations for this. It's been really super hyped. Richard Osman is quite a well-known TV personality in the UK, and this was his first novel, and it had been getting a lot of press, a lot of coverage, and it was okay. I realised pretty much as soon as I started reading it that I wasn't going to love it quite as much as everyone else seemed to be loving it. The style of writing just didn't quite work for me. It was a murder mystery, clearly an homage to Agatha Christie, but it was just a little bit too convoluted in places. My dad borrowed it after me and said a few too many red herrings for him. It was alright. I would read more in the series. I liked the characters well enough, and I think once I'm used to the style of writing it would be fine. And then my favourite book is really difficult, and so I'm not going to pick, I'm just going to tell you about both of them because I can do that because it's my channel. My 2 favourite books of the month were The Empire of Gold, which is the final book in the David trilogy by S.A. Chakraborty. I adored this book. I loved it so much. I was buddy reading it with a couple of booktube friends and we all just really loved this book. But it's really hard to choose between this book and this book is my favourite for the month. So this is A Closed and Common Orbit by Becky Chambers. This was the book that I reread. This is the 2nd book in the Wayfarers series, of which The Galaxy and the Ground Within is the newest, the final one. This is my favourite book in the series so far, and I just loved it just as much on the reread as I did the first time round, and it would be very difficult for this to be replaced as my favourite book in this series, but I mean, who knows? Until I've read The Galaxy and the Ground Within, who knows? So I still have to reread the 3rd book, Record of a Spaceborne Few, before I read the final one. So much love for both of these books, both of these series, both of these authors, and so I can't choose between them as to which is my favourite. That's it for this video. Thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this quick rundown of my stats. I've switched back to the recent reads type videos for keeping you up to date with my thoughts on books because it enables me to go into a little bit more detail, whereas in my January wrap up I went through all the books I read. I'm not going to do that today. I will link to my most recent reads videos where I've talked about some more of these books in a bit more detail, and then there will be another one of those coming along soon. I'm actually going to film it next. That will cover some more of the books that I read this month. Let me know if you've read any of these books and what you thought of them. Let me know what your favourite thing you read in February was, or your least favourite maybe. And if you've got this far, in honour of my jumper, leave me a dinosaur emoji. If you can't think of anything you want to say, just to let me know you've been watching, that'll be fun. You can also like this video if you liked it and subscribe if you haven't already. And you can also follow me on my social media. All that information will be listed for you in the description box below. But that's it for today, so thank you so much for watching and I will talk to you again soon. Bye!